Welcome to the NancoVerse podcast. It's the 21st of February and it's a Monday. Monday! What do you guys think of Mondays? Mondays are magnificent. Mondays are manic. Mondays are mundane. What do you think? What do you think about Mondays? There's a lot of philosophy about around Mondays. People who like their jobs actually look forward to Mondays. People who don't want to go to work are like, damn, man, it's a Monday, dude. I was having so much fun on a weekend, but now it's a Monday, so I need to get to work. But I would feel like the most important thing is to like your work because I would want to be on that space of my life. Because if I'm always looking forward to the weekend, then Mondays are going to make me feel miserable. But I don't want to feel miserable. I want to feel great. I want to feel amazing. So here we go with another episode of the NancoVerse, and I would like to start today's podcast with a beautiful, beautiful writing by a man called Dr. Huberman. I don't know how many of you have heard of him, but he's a neuroscientist and ophthalmologist from Stanford School, and he's really good. You should check him out. His name is HubermanLab. It's spelled as HubermanLab. Huberman, and thank me later. A little excerpt from one of his posts on Instagram, which says, "Many a problem can be avoided by learning to maintain cognitive clarity in states of high autonomic arousal. If you're doing cold showers, cold immersions, etc., try doing it in silence. Maybe even do some math in your head." That's supposed to be a joke. Tools such as deliberate cold water exposure have immediate and indirect benefits. For example, 11 minutes total per week of uncomfortably cold but safe, obviously, cold exposure can increase metabolism and brown mitochondrial rich healthy fat, increases dopamine levels to up to 2.5 times. So guys, get into a cold shower, do it. I know it's hard, I know it's difficult, especially in the winters, but you gotta do it for that good mitochondrial rich brown fat and the increase in dopamine that makes us feel good about the things that are supposed to make us feel good. Often missing, however, are physiologically grounded protocols for us to become less impulsively reactive. As it turns out, the impulse to vocalize and to move are two such forms of reactivity. Learning to suppress those in quote in order to maintain mental clarity can be very beneficial as it exports to other domains of life. Note: vocalizing under stress can of course be very beneficial in some circumstances. I am not suggesting people learn to suppress adaptive vocalizations or staying in unsafe settings. The idea here is to maintain mental clarity so that you can think more adaptively, not less. So if you're doing deliberate cold exposure, perhaps try doing it in silence, meaning that you don't speak while getting into, during, or getting out of the cold exposure. It's not about suffering in silence, it's about learning to maintain clarity of mind when you have a lot of adrenaline in your system. Just have fun with it. Yell and scream or sing if you have to. Your choice. The effect is simply different in each case. The metabolic effects are still there no matter what. Great. So Dr. Huberman is telling us to get into a cold shower, and I am telling you that we are getting into the news of the day. And I want to start today's news with a really interesting financial news, which is about how 1 in 3 IPOs this fiscal have been trading below its issue price. There have been so many IPOs, which are initial public offerings that have happened in the past few months. Lot of interesting ones, including Nykaa, Paytm, Zomato. All of these companies are companies that we use, and these are very customer facing, customer oriented tech companies. However, there is a flip side to this whole scenario, because a lot of times these companies will overvalue themselves when they go into an IPO, and what happens later on is they tank and people lose money. So be very careful when you invest your money. This is a story by George Matthew and Sandeep Singh in the Indian Express. At least 1 in 3 IPOs this financial year since its current trading below its issue offer price. In the past 10 plus months since April 1, 2021, in fiscal year 21-22, as many as 50 companies mopped up a record 1,11,156 crores. 50 companies mopped up a record 1,11,156 crores. State-owned LIC too expects to mobilize over 50,000 crore through an IPO this year itself. During the same 10-month period, the benchmark sensitive index Sensex of the Bombay Stock Exchange gained over 16.5%. BSE mid-cap and small mid-cap indices rose 18% and 34% respectively during the same period. If investors in 18 companies out of 50 listed companies are sitting on losses, several others have generated only marginal gains. Of the 32 trading at a premium as on February 18, a dozen generated capital gains of up to 15%, which includes 7 that have risen up to 10%, according to the data compiled by the Indian Express. Amongst the losers, investors in Car Trade Tech and 197 Communications, which is Paytm, suffered the maximum value erosion, with shares trading over 60% below their issue price. Paytm's not doing that well. Even Zomato witnessed a sharp 36% correction over the last 1 month. It is currently trading at Rs 86, which is 13% over its issue price. FSN e-commerce, Nykaa, saw its share price fall from 2071 on January 17 this year to 1397 on February 18. So if you bought its shares at 2000s, my sympathies are with you. Damn. The issue was priced at 1125. Data patterns dropped from Rs 815 to 652 during the same period. Data patterns dropped from Rs 851 to Rs 652 during the same period. The sharp fall must be seen in the context of a larger selling pressure in tech stocks. While the BSE Tech fell 8% against the Sensex fall of 0.7% since December 31st, the Nasdaq has lost 13.4% compared with 6% in the Dow Jones, which is the American market. Like how we have NSE and BSE, they have Nasdaq and Dow Jones. Half a dozen IPOs are quoting at a premiere or off over 100%, and another 6 have returned between 50% and 100% capital gains since their listing. Okay, that's not a bad thing. I'll repeat this. Half a dozen IPOs are quoting at a premium of over 100%, and another 6 have returned between 50% and 100% capital gains since their listing. Another 6. So out of 50, 6 have returned 50% and 100% capital gains since their listing. So if you made the right choice, you made the right choice. The CEO of an asset management company said investors should be careful when there are many IPOs. Quote, "It is always seen that when the markets are on a high, IPOs tend to bunch up as companies hope to command a high premium." I did notice that as well. In such cases, promoters don't leave much on the table for investors. They make the most, said the CEO, who did not wish to be named, of course, because he's speaking the truth, and when you speak the truth, sometimes you're scared. The CEO further raised concern over the huge valuation demand by new age technology companies and investor appetite. Quote, "If these companies could not make profit in lockdown when everything turned online, I am not comfortable with them when the economy has opened up." The top 10 gainers appreciated between 58% and 273%, with Paras Defense and Space Tech topping the list, with the gain of 273%. Its shares jumped from 175 to Rs 654 after listing in October 2021. So Paras Defense and Space Tech went up. If you've been investing in those, good for you, especially in October. The top loser is Car Trade Tech, which came out with an IPO at Rs 1,618 per share. This share is now trading at 586, a discount of 63.8%. Investors also lost in the high-profile IPO of Paytm. The company, which offered its shares at Rs 2,150, is now quoting at 833 on the exchanges. My God, they had asked for 2,150 for their IPO and are now trading at 833. The market capitalization of Paytm has crashed from the IPO valuation of Rs 1.5 lakh crore to Rs 54,000 crore as on February 18. Even the market cap went down, which is very, very shocking. But these things happen, and a lot of times investors do not know about this. It dropped from 1.5 lakh crores to 54,000 crore as on February 18. The large size of Paytm's IPO, coupled with a complex business model and high valuation metrics, dampened the performance post listing. Despite this, the IPO story of India races ahead, and the IPOs which were launched after Paytm, such as Go Fashion and Tega Industries, proved to be extremely successful, said Mohan Ralhan, Managing Partner and Chief Investor Officer of TIW Private Equity. This year, 2022, is expected to witness IPOs from LIC, the big one, Ola, Byju's, and Delivery. India is home to 79 unicorns. 42 emerged in 2021 alone. Damn. India is the third largest startup hub in the world and has developed a strong ecosystem of entrepreneurs and venture capital investors, supported by favorable government policies which will continue to feed into India's accelerating IPO boom. The sector has just begun and the future looks bright, Ralhan said. An investment banker said the fate of the IPO market is linked to the strength of the stock market. If the stock market remains volatile and shows major correction, some of the issuers might postpone their IPO plans. On top of this, if issuers price their IPOs at high levels without leaving anything on the table for retail investors, there are bound to be some post-listing disasters. With the US Federal Reserve planning to hike rates and tighten the monetary policy, foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, have started exiting from newly listed IPOs along with secondary markets. They see the gains and they walk away. Market regulator SEBI is also concerned about valuations. The IPO market price discovery is not as, quote, transparent and efficient as secondary market price discovery, SEBI chairman Ajay Tyagi said while addressing a CII summit in September last year. In a consultation paper last week, SEBI said new age companies should make disclosures about their valuations based on issuance of new shares and acquisition of shares in the past 18 months before filing draft offer documents. Very interesting for all the investors out there. Be very, very careful. Keep your eyes open. इन्वेस्टिंग इज़ अ सब्जेक्ट मैटर ऑफ सोलिसिटेशन. इसका मतलब ये होता है कि अगर आप इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं तो आपको सारी इन्फॉर्मेशन पता होनी चाहिए. आपको पता होना चाहिए आप कौन से स्टॉक में इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं, क्यों इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं, इन्होंने कितना प्रॉफिट कमाया है, इनका नेटवर्थ एक्चुअली इतना है भी जितना ये पैसा कमा रहे हैं. Fundamentals are very important to understand, and it's always good to speak to somebody who knows about these things or at least invests themselves. So a lot of young investors are investing these days because it's all on your phone. You can download an app called Grow, you can download an app called Zerodha. Without much education, without much background, people are investing in the market, and a lot of times these things work out. A lot of times people make money, but a lot of times people lose money as well, hard-earned money at that. So be very careful when you invest, but also at the same time do it because it's fun and it's important to compound your money. So yes, get all the information you can and get on it. Moving on, I would want to bring the attention of the listeners to an editorial written by Nivida Chandra, who is a psychologist and founder of Kind Space Center for Mental Health. Nivida Chandra has written about the need to show compassion to the kids who are returning back to school. We need to show compassion not just to kids but also to adults, and I can say this because I need some always. Sometimes when I'm not feeling good, showing a little bit of compassion makes all the difference between having a good day or having a bad day. And as children's return to classrooms, it's important for everybody involved in the entire scheme, which is teachers, parents and the kids themselves. It's important to show compassion and it's important to make sure that they have a good learning experience. We've had a couple of years of schools being shut. I cannot even imagine what these kids are going through and what kind of development are they having or the lack of it. And I felt that this editorial needs to be brought to the fore because people need to show compassion. And here we go. Since schools closed, students have been through a lot of changes. Not only have they aged, they have become different people, having lived through a pandemic at such a young age. So what should schools expect when children return? How can they prepare to support their emotional adjustment and safeguard their development beyond academic achievement? As a society, we have always struggled to accept that school is about more than academic achievement. School is where children make friends, encounter bullies, face anxieties, experiment with identities, have secret adventures. Oh, I had so many. Live independent lives and learn who they are away from their parents. If their home environment is unstable for any reason, they have the chance to live a different life where they can feel like they have a higher degree of freedom and control. That is the essential to their psychological development. That is essential to their psychological development is beyond debate. Being home for the larger part of 2 years has denied them these necessary development opportunities. Undoubtedly, children have missed their friends, and the routine of going to school can have induced grief and listlessness. Listlessness? What is that? Listlessness. Beyond this, though, several children have experienced COVID induced health anxieties and the loss of loved ones, varying textures of violence and financial crisis, and several other issues. The symptom grabbing everyone's attention seems to be an increase in screen time. Yes, kids, it's not just you, but I cannot even imagine being a kid and being in front of the screen at all the time. Less attention has been paid to nuisance symptoms such as disrupted sleep or eating patterns, lack of focus and motivation to study, sullen behavior, and temper tantrums. Older children have been taken to doctors for anything from mild mood and anxiety disorders to instances of addiction and self harm. Despite our intention to support our children, it seems we have instead decided to manage them and place the burden of coping academically and emotionally on them alone. It is one of the great privileges of adulthood to develop an amnesia about how we would have liked to be treated when we were children and adolescents. Children do not always communicate directly and often go unheard when they try, nor do they have an emotional vocabulary to explain the complexity of emotions they might be going through. Instead, they withdraw, get angry, stop studying, or lose focus. Our instinct unthinkingly is to respond by telling them to engage, stop feeling angry, study harder, and focus more. Unsurprisingly, such advice never works. These are expressions of their feelings. Withdrawing into their phones, for instance, can well be an expression of loneliness, despair, and a feeling of being unmoored. Children are alive to everything around them. Holding it inside, trying to make sense of it, can be to carry a lot. Shutting down, receding into technology, might be a protective response that offers stimulation and engagement on their terms. I know so many adults who do this. They'll just go on their phones because they're not able to engage with people around them anymore. Other responses to this felt helplessness, no less extreme, could be addictions of various kinds and attempts at self-harm. It is, therefore, unreasonable to expect children to return to normal just by virtue of them attending school again. Students may struggle to reassimilate with friends, while many others may not know how to study in a classroom. Schools need to be prepared for hundreds of students, each carrying the burden of the past 2 years, coming together under one roof. This is a moment to think beyond labeling students as those, quote, failing behind or depressed, exhibiting conduct disorders, and sending them for behavioral interventions or calling their parents to reprimand them. It is an opportunity to move from a punitive to a compassionate, supportive stance. The aim now is not to graduate them from one class to the next, but to help them mourn what was lost, recover, and feel safe again. This is an appeal to the administrators, governments, schools, and PTAs. Be proactive in addressing psychological and behavioral concerns. Help parents understand the symptoms as responses to the difficulties their children have been through. Give parents and children a vocabulary to talk about their concerns. Use age-appropriate language and creative ways to help children express their feelings and challenges. Make an effort to know which children may have faced death and other identifiable crises in these times. Reach out to them personally. Let them know you care. Don't ask why someone didn't attend a class. Ask what's going on within. Look out for the really quiet or obedient child. Look out for the behavioral signs that are completely discordant from the child you knew. Don't be afraid to ask children what's going on with them. Often they're hoping someone will notice them and ask. You don't have to have all the answers, just hear them out. Create professional systems that involve all manner of mental health professionals who can help you navigate these problems. Offer school counseling services. Create informed and capable systems that can truly be relied on by the students. These can include psychotherapists, counselors, parents, teachers, and even some older students who with basic training can become the first line of therapeutic relief and instill a sense of community. These efforts can also take the form of team activities, sports, theatre, and the like, which can be seamlessly incorporated into the daily calendar without additional budgetary or personnel stressors. The time for gradually assimilating such changes into our system is gone. This is a call for a pendulous shift in the approach to parenthood, to studenthood. This is a call for a pendulous shift in the approach to studenthood. Even so, the idea is not to attend to mental health as the flavor du jour. It is to demonstrate a sustained attention to it. This is eminently doable without disruption to other schools' activities and schedules. We have not even begun to understand the long term impact of this time on the lives of children. Short term repair, at the very least, will require an additional commitment to the psychosocial development of the children. This is, then, also a good time to examine what education really means and the place schools hold in the lives of our children. This was a beautiful editorial written by Nivida Chandra, and I feel it is very important to make sure that we show compassion. We show compassion to the people around us, especially to the kids who are going back to school, people who are going back to work. After 2 years of pandemic, I think it is very important to have compassion for the people around us because we never know what someone's going through. And sometimes the best thing that we can do is ask and listen. Moving on, I would like to read a beautifully written article by a man called A.S. Bhasin. A.S. Bhasin is a retired director, Historical Division of the Ministry of External Affairs. In 2018, he published a 5-volume documentary study of India-China relations, 1947-2000. His book, Nehru, Tibet and China, was published in June 2021. I would love to read that book. And this is a beautifully written article about China's revisionism on 1962. Revisionism could be explained as something as changing the history, something that happened in the past but you revise what actually happened and give it a new meaning. And China is really good at these things because they want to show to the world that they're not as aggressive as they are, and never even in the past, like something like 1962, the war that happened between India and China, where India suffered a lot of casualties. It was done by Chinese aggression, but now they're trying to change the course of history. And I would want to dabble straight into the article because it's beautifully written and I think everybody should listen to this. China's revisionism on 1962. Amid the Galwan standoff, the Chinese have claimed their 1962 aggression was a quote counterattack. This is not borne out by facts or logic, but the opportunities India lost to settle the border disputes are well documented. The Chinese website Guancha has published an 8,000-word revised history of the 1962 war after 6 decades to justify the propaganda line of, quote, never attack, never invade another country. The propaganda line, this is. And to present China as a peace-loving nation. The story written by Zhang Jiokang, daughter of the former military commander in Tibet, General Zhang Guohua, comes in the wake of the conflict in the western sector in the Galwan Valley. In recent years, China has evoked strong reactions from major countries for its claims on superpower status through the aggressive use of economic and military sinews. With the UK on Hong Kong, with Australia on trade, with Japan over the ownership of Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, with the US on its projection of military power, and with Southeast Asian countries over control of South China Sea, despite the verdict of the World Court under the UNCLOS agreement. UNCLOS is United Nations Convention of Law of Seas, The recent attempts by China to stir up trouble on the India-China border in Galwan River Valley has added to the worries of not only India but the international community generally. History on its head. One can understand Madame Zhang desires to glorify her father, but to portray the 1962 war as a quote, self-defense counterattack is a poor attempt to make history stand on its head. There is a contradiction in her story. A counterattack does not allow the attacked country the luxury of elaborate planning over a long period, as she herself points out, quoting Mao. Quote, over the years, we have taken many measures to seek a peaceful solution to the Sino-Indian border problem, but India has refused to do so and deliberately provoked an armed conflict which has become more and more intense. Since Nehru must fight, we have no choice but to go along with it. She recalls that Mao had called a meeting of his political and military brass and asked them, quote, perhaps if we counterattack, the border can be settled and a peaceful resolution of the border issue can be achieved. And General Zhang Guohua had assured him, yes, we can. Please rest assured, Chairman, we definitely will win. Facing an attack, the attack party counterattacks. Facing an attack, the attack party counterattacks with whatever force is available, win or lose. If cannot wait for a leisurely meeting to be called by the head of the government and plan for a counterattack after getting an assurance of victory. In this context, a 2019 article written by Chua Dai, distinguished professor at Yunnan University and director of the YNU Institute for Indian Studies in Kunming, China, is more honest. He has little hesitation in admitting that from 1960 to October 1962, judging that India was unwilling to negotiate a solution, China, quote, made preparations for deployment of its military, creating interlocking positions for, quote, long-term armed coexistence on the border issue, ultimately proceeding to the border conflict. The statement is nearest to the truth. I would like to repeat this. Made preparations for deployments of its military for long-term armed coexistence on the border issue, ultimately proceeding to the border conflict. This statement is nearest to the truth. Analyzing the circumstances, one has to see if India was actually prepared for an attack. On September 8, 1962, Nehru left for London to attend the Commonwealth Prime Minister's Conference. He returned on October 2. After visiting Paris, Lagos and Accra, and then left for Colombo on October 12, returning to New Delhi on October 16. Defense Minister V.K. Krishna Menon was in New York from September 1730 for the UNGA session. On October 2nd, the Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General B.M. Kaul, was holidaying in Kashmir. No country that is preparing for an attack would allow its Prime Minister or senior generals responsible for war planning to be away from its capital. Nehru's mistakes. The culprit was an avoidable statement of the Prime Minister to journalists on October 12 while leaving for Colombo that he had instructed the army to clear the Indian territory of Chinese intrusions and the date had been left to the army to decide. He was perhaps referring to a decision taken in the Defense Ministry to clear the recent intrusions in the Kemong division of NEFA, a limited action. People's Daily, the Chinese Communist Party's mouthpiece, taking advantage of Nehru's remarks, said on October 14, quote, so it seems Nehru had made up his mind to attack China on an even bigger scale. The above unfortunate statement of Nehru has been used by Madame Zhang to fabricate the history of self-defense counterattack. While we can fault the Chinese for this fabrication, India cannot escape blame for not being serious in settling the border question. Despite repeated Chinese pleas, whatever the Indian stand, it had certain fissures that do not stand scrutiny. Prime Minister Nehru, in his explaining his reluctance to discuss the border question, had said in Rajya Sabha on December 8, 1959, that since we're, quote, sure of our borders, the question was why invite discussions about a thing which we had no doubt. Even the statement had problems. The western border, which created the major dispute, was undefined in the survey of Indian maps that India inherited in 1947 and which were later reprinted. Similarly, Nehru was not unaware that China in the past had never accepted the McMahon Line in the eastern sector. the outcome of the Shimla Convention of 1914, and it was unlikely to accept it, and yet insisted this was non negotiable. Opportunities lost. In 1954, at the time of talks on Tibet, India had taken the stand that the border question would not be discussed. An opportunity to settle the border was allowed to slip. After the Tibet Agreement was signed on April 29, 1954, Nehru ordered in July that a line should be drawn to demarcate the Ladakh-Aksai Chin border, which would not be open for discussion. Ignoring that this was an international border, the required consultations and agreement of the other stakeholder. Having changed the status of the border unilaterally, he created a vacuum by not establishing a checkpost or even unfurling a flag. The area was neglected to the extent that India was unaware that China had constructed a 120-kilometer highway through it. In his letter of January 23, 1959, the Chinese premier had suggested talks since. As he said, historically no agreement on the boundary had ever been concluded, and the absence of former delimitation created discrepancies which would often lead to, quote, minor border incidents which are probably difficult to avoid. On March 22nd, Nehru noted that the sector from the tri-junction of Nepal, India and Tibet boundary up to Ladakh, Ladakh-Aksai Chin sector, was traditionally known by custom usage by the application of the principle of watershed and old revenue records and maps, etc. These facts are important inputs when negotiating an agreement, but by themselves could not constitute an agreement. Despite suffering from doubts, Nehru insisted in Rajya Sabha on December 9, 1959, that India should hold its position, hoping that, quote, lapse of time and events would confirm it, and by the time challenge came, we would be in a much stronger position to face it. There was an opportunity to clear the doubts at the summit talks in April 1960, but that too was allowed to slip because India insisted on China accepting its maximalist position, not realizing that in a dispute, both sides have to make compromises to come to a settlement. Even after the 1960 talks, China tried to bring India to the negotiating table many times, but Nehru's rigidity did not help. Yet, he did accept in parliament that the undemarcated status of the border. China continued to insist on the need for a well-defined demarcation of borders on scientific lines. Unfortunately, India remained in denial. The result was 1962. This line in particular made me really like I get goosebumps when I read this. There was an opportunity to clear the doubts at the summit talks in April 1960, but that too was allowed to slip because India insisted on China accepting its maximalist position, not realizing that in a dispute, both sides have to make compromises to come to a settlement. Sometimes it is important to make a little bit of a compromise, not just in geopolitics but also in our personal lives, because having a maximalist approach can lead to wars, and this is something that I think India and China both should learn from and at least move towards solving the border issues and making sure that not more lives are lost and that our people, India and China together, comprise over 10% of the world population, and we have a lot of responsibility towards the people who live in our countries to provide them with health, to provide them with opportunities and provide them with shelter. And the more money that we spend on making sure that our sovereignty is not under threat, the more money we are not spending on these people. So India and China should definitely sit on the negotiating table and make sure that their borders are not disputed anymore. And with this, I'd like to conclude today's episode. I hope you guys listened. I hope you guys liked what you listened to. And I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to get more. I'm trying to bring you guys more nuance and getting better at reading. And I hope that you guys, whenever you listen to me, also make sure that, you go through the timelines, because I'm timelining everything, I'm putting the chapters on. So that will be a lot of help to you. And thank you so much for listening. I hope that you guys have a great day ahead. And I wish myself the same thing. Jai Hind.